Is it water with the sheep in the box?
Hey, do you know what cultural Marxism is? If you're watching this video, the likelihood is that you do, because I mostly talk about politics and philosophy, but if for some reason you've been sent this video rather than the 1H Bomber guy I made a few years ago, I guess hi, and let me briefly explain what it is. The idea is that when the socialist revolution, exemplified by the Soviet Union, which as I mentioned in a previous video was not really socialist, but let's ignore that for now, because the sort of people who believe in cultural Marxism also believe that Marxism is universal healthcare and nationalised rail services, failed to, as planned, spread throughout the world due to a number of factors, the communists, rather than give up, decided to instead infuse Marxist theory into media in order to indoctrinate the people into gaining class consciousness and therefore being susceptible to being manipulated or used to attain the nefarious political ends of this Marxist elite. The problem, of course, is that this situation requires a significant level of logical leaps. For example, how do the cultural Marxists infiltrate the media, gain levels of power and influence required in order to enact this conspiracy, and critically, why haven't they given up yet, considering that this apparently started in the 1920s and has so far been unsuccessful, to put it mildly? Well, I'm afraid to say that the answer is that it's all a pack of lies, mostly popularized by the Nazis, who under the guise of purging the cultural Bolsheviks, sent a huge amount of socialists and Jews, because they also believed it was a collaboration between the Jews and the socialists, to the camps. Incidentally, it's for this reason that people who claim that the Jews control the media or the economy or whatever are often viewed as rather dangerous individuals, because that kind of rhetoric can lead to paranoia and prejudice, leading to atrocity. So glad we don't have a prime minister who would spread those lies, or a children's author who would perpetuate the stereotype. A lot of people will point to the fact that there are a disproportionate number of Jewish people working in Hollywood, which at one point was partially true, but not for the reasons you might think. See, Jews in the early 20th century were heavily discriminated against, and there were only certain areas of employment open to young, creative Jewish people. One of them was comic books, which is why a lot of comic book legends from the early to mid 20th century were Jewish, and another was Hollywood. This hasn't been the case for decades, however, and people still going on about it are not being as honest as they might like to pretend. Let's talk about the people who believe in this nonsense, which covers a lot more people than you might like to think. As a result of its history, the cultural Marxism conspiracy theory is beloved of the far right. They can pretend that the reason people hate them so much and that society keeps getting more liberal, at least for now, is because of a Jewish communist conspiracy to control the minds of the people and force them to believe that black people and women being in Star Wars is okay. Mark Collett, for example, believes that it's due to this conspiracy that a TV advert flogging oven chips, I don't know if Americans have oven chips, but in case they're exclusively a British thing and I hadn't realised, they're like frozen fries which we just chuck in the oven for half an hour and they come out tasting almost, but not quite as good as if they had been fried, featuring single-parent families, miscegenation, and gay couples, and their kids came into existence. Don't believe me? Here's a clip from his video.
Created by Adam and Eve, DDB, the ad celebrates the family in all its forms by featuring gay dads, a working mum, and hands-on grandma. End quote. Well, Adam and Eve DDB is part of DDB Worldwide Communications Group Incorporated, known internationally as simply DDB. The name DDB comes from the names of the three founders of the company, Bill Bernbach, Ned Doyle, and Mac Dane. And it must be a massive coincidence, as two of those three, Bill Bernbach and Mac Dane, both come from Jewish families. Really makes you think. These big corporations and the advertising agencies they spend millions or even billions of dollars with each year, they all have an agenda. And that agenda isn't just to sell us goods and services. It's a political and social agenda. And more often than not, it's a political and social agenda that attacks the healthy and traditional structures and norms within our society. These companies are chipping away at the very foundations of our civilization.
And as if that wasn't enough to demonstrate that he's a Nazi, just a bit of background on Collett, who was featured in a Channel 4 documentary on the extreme far-right neo-fascist British National Party, the leader of which famously admitted to participating in crypto-fascist behaviour and lying about his positions in order to have his message be more readily accepted, which was called Young Nazi and Proud, which I think says it all really. In said documentary, he declared his admiration for Adolf Hitler and said that he considered AIDS a friendly disease because blacks, drug users and gays have it. He appeared on Russell Brand Ran's TV show in 2002 and described homosexuals as aid monkeys, bum bandits, and of course the F-slur. Very similar language to our literal sitting Prime Minister, incidentally, but let's ignore that for now. Collett was the BNP's head of publicity and produced the party's monthly magazine Identity, presumably meaning that he was complicit in the crypto-fascism at the time. In another documentary in 2004, Collett described asylum seekers as cockroaches, and in a BBC interview in 2009, he said that the England international footballer Ashley Cole, who looks like this, was not ethnically British because he wasn't white enough. And also, this is a picture of Mark Collett with his girlfriend, who literally has a swastika tattooed on her tits because fuck subtlety, I guess.
Start with telling me about your affection for Nazi Germany then.
You're referring to what I said in the car. I'm not a Nazi, but if you want to call me a Nazi sympathiser, you can. We, or people like me, or young people, or the people you saw with tattoos on, or the people you saw with wacky shirts on, they feel an affinity for something because they feel totally betrayed, and they feel that white people are being sold out today. And the only person they're told in the history books that ever stuck up for white people was Hitler. Well, I had an inkling that you were a Jew, but you told me that you weren't, so I trusted you.
But the point of this video isn't just to redo that old H-bomb video or to tell you that literal Nazi conspiracy theories maybe don't hold as much weight as they claim to. No, see, cultural Marxism is just the most extreme version of this conspiracy, and both the origin and logical endpoint of all the others, but not the only one. It's the template, but not the whole, and the title of this video isn't why only Nazis believe this conspiracy theory. We're starting off with cultural Marxism and neo-Nazis because they're the most extreme example, and often people who fall into the categories I'll be discussing in a moment will end up agreeing with this point due to logical consistency being more important to them than morality, but it's not unique to neo-Nazis by any stretch. Let's talk about the YouTube movie weirdos. If you're in any way, shape or form familiar with online movie criticism, nerd culture or people on the internet getting mad about, well, pretty much anything, you'll be aware that there are a couple of approaches to this. The super rare posting, long-form, pretentious critics who claim to be able to offer objective critiques, which of course never are actually objective because that's not what objectivity means.
Creed is looking at ancient artifacts while getting them explained by some lady. He gets rather flustered when she implies that the artifacts were discovered and corrects her. These things were not paid for by this woman's ancestors, they were stolen just like they stole everything else.
And on the other end of the scale, the daily nerd outrage merchants who go see every movie when it comes out and vlog about it afterwards in their car or on their set filled with geek paraphernalia, or whatever comes in geek gear and loot crate boxes. Interestingly enough, Red Letter Media managed to expertly spoof the aesthetic of this kind of YouTuber, whilst ironically actually sharing much of the same rhetoric and reactionary tendencies. Now, presumably, a lot of these personalities are bigots, misogynists, racists and so on. I genuinely don't know why so much of nerd culture has been taken over by these people, but it's unmistakably true, unfortunately, and as a result often leads to them actually just being incredibly upset with women and black people, for example, you know, existing and being in movies. But they can't just say that, of course. No one's going to listen to a bunch of losers on the internet crying about Captain Marvel having a strong, powerful woman in it, or Black Panther for celebrating African culture or discussing issues of colonialism, because, well, those people just sound like bigoted idiots who are scared of minorities and don't want to see them in movies for blatantly prejudicial reasons. So what's a bigot to do? Well,
in short, Black Widow is going to be a feminist anti-gun diversity piece on propaganda. Oh my god. This is unbelievable. Please, somebody defend this. Somebody defend this when I have sat here for almost 2 years on this channel and I said that film is not about entertainment, it's not about telling a story, and it's not about honoring the source material for these people. It's about pushing an agenda. I have said it time and time again. And now you have this woman who was the writer of Captain Marvel, I believe. She's the writer of the upcoming Black Widow film, and she's involved with WandaVision. Now again, like I said, we have a female character and an actress that almost everybody universally respects and appreciates. And what happens when you get in that situation? Because they hate when a female-led film gets overwhelming positivity. Same with a film with non-white dudes as the lead. They hate when it gets overwhelming positivity because it ruins their narrative. This is why they ignored Alita. Alita. Oh, everybody loved Alita, but you're telling everybody we hate female characters. No, we hate terribly written female characters. We hate agenda-driven scripts and narratives built around these female characters. We have nothing against female characters.
And currently, the TV industry and the movie industry and Hollywood in general is very, very far left. Very far left. And most commentators on it are very far left. Most outlets such as, most major outlets are far left. This one is The Mary Sue, which I know a lot of people will hear that and immediately laugh. And yeah, it is. It's a hilarious outlet. You can find some pure pieces of comedy gold on there.
Yeah, see, that's the problem. It's the liberal feminist agenda. Those liberals, feminists, and gender activists have infiltrated the media and are making movies in order to further their specific political and/or philosophical agenda. I mean, it's not like media's ever been political, and it could just be that a couple of creative people happened to put a little bit of a political message in a movie they were working on, which is about as standard as it can get. And if we're really going to get upset about the MCU doing it, we also have to condemn the works of George Orwell and Ayn Rand, which is something reactionaries are usually reluctant to do. Sorry, but if the original Star Wars movies were allowed to be about a galactic civil war in which a group of freedom fighters violently oppose a fascist empire, the leaders of which resistant group appear to be mostly female, and one of whom was a black guy in 1980, which was rather progressive. Sound familiar? The centrists and centre-right may not believe that the Jews are controlling the media because their enemy is not the Jews, and they believe that they're not anti-Semitic, often whilst professing their love for Harry Potter, ironically, but that the real enemy is the liberals, the feminists, the identity politics people, the gender activists, and these people cause so many movies to now include women and black people as if they're people, as if representation matters and is a positive thing. Must be a conspiracy. The liberals and feminists are controlling the media in order to push a poisonous agenda and indoctrinate people into accepting that maybe it's okay to exist whilst a minority. But okay, so it's obviously not the Jews, and maybe it's not the liberals or feminists controlling the media either, but it's ridiculous and annoying when people put in explicitly left-wing messages or want to encourage or educate the audience in order to change or improve the world in some small way, right?
I find the ultra left-leaning aspect of the show really fucking irritating. It's just like, it's exactly like Family Guy. They do it in Family Guy all the time. It's like,
it's so alienating though, because I'm not right-wing, but
conservative or capitalist media never does that, except for when it explicitly does, but it's at least rarer. I mean, conservative philosophy boils down to small-minded obsession with maintaining the status quo, an obsession with a glorified past, but also bigotry and licking the boots of the rich, which, well, it's not impossible to put in a movie, but in comparison to a message of hope, solidarity, or inclusivity, not anywhere near as applicable to your standard 3-act structure about relatable characters. Who's going to root for the billionaire who goes around beating the shit out of poor people instead of using his immense wealth to reduce or even eradicate poverty or homelessness? Or the hyper-masculine ancient heroes who are already perfect and whose enemies are all effeminate or in some way deformed and vulnerable, who shun all who differ from their ideal of perfect masculinity, or like Tim Allen, only true monsters. Hey, so you know how hard white people have it in comparison to the rest of the world? How easy people of colour have it, and how much representation, mostly positive representation, that women, gays, trans people and people of colour get in comparison to your average cis-het white man. After all, it would have to be the case in order to explain the massive amount of internet edgelords whining about the relatively few occasions that minority actors get serious positive media representation. We talked about this when it came up with the Iconoclast, but he's far from the only one. Let's talk about One Angry Gamer. Should be a fun little case study. Who is One Angry Gamer? Well, as the name might imply, he's a gamer who gets angry about things. What things, you might ask? Well, mostly black people, but also women, LGBTQ+ people, and people who don't want the planet to die in a fiery apocalypse in a few years' time. Also, very rarely games for some reason. I guess movies are far more lucrative right now. One Angry Gamer, specifically, takes issue when a traditionally cis-het white male character in nerd culture is instead portrayed by someone who, well, isn't one of those things. For example, let's take a look how mad he got over the potential of the character of Catwoman, specifically Selena Kyle, because Catwoman has actually been a person of colour multiple times before, and and once people started mocking him over this, he instead changed tack to, actually it was the fact that a specific person is race swapped, not the character of Catwoman, even though I said Catwoman in the headline, and throughout the article refer specifically to Catwoman and not Selena Kyle. Absolutely nothing is safe from the touch of the postmodernists. They swarm and feed on the carcass of creativity that wallows in your mind like the rotting remains of a wildebeest under a scorching Namibia sun. Nothing you enjoy is safe. Everything you value is a target. What little is left for you to hold on to is taken away like a gummy toy from a teething toddler in a tiny pram. And what lovely toy did they take away from you today? Catwoman. This is just fucking hilariously unhinged, right? But wait, there's more. Kravitz originally auditioned to play as Catwoman in Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight Rises, but she was rightfully turned down for the role because they properly acknowledged that she was too urban for the role. And Nolan instead with the more refined yet... oh, fuck's sake. Does he not know how... whatever. And Nolan instead went with the more refined yet ill-fitted feisty free Anne Hathaway. It looks like this is possibly Hollywood's way of doling out colour casting reparations, which is disgusting in and of itself. Now, aside from the grammatical errors and the fact that he describes the concept of reparations or making amends for centuries of oppression as disgusting, I just want to point out the rather hilarious description of black people as too urban. Where's he from? 1982. Also, Gotham City is, you know, a city, so most Batman characters are rather urban, but that's okay. Ignored is the fact that black people are often referred to as urban due to a history of institutionalized racism and poverty, and of course inner city neighborhoods mostly being underprivileged and white people generally being more well off and therefore more able to live in more comfortable, safer areas like suburbs. What a disgusting display of hatred towards the fans. Dismayed and disturbed is probably the best way to sum up this news. It's obvious Hollywood has a war on whites and they're forcing you to choke on a coffee flavored of race swapped characters, even if you don't like it. Yikes. Hollywood has a war on whites. They're forcing you to choke on a big black cock. Oh, no, sorry, Freud. But they, in a curious amount of brackets, are forcing you to choke on a coffee-flavoured cast of race-swapped characters. Weird how it's never explained why that's a bad thing, or who the they who control Hollywood are, but it's no big deal, I guess. How many people do you know who get mad about their favourite characters maybe being black, a woman, gay, etc. in reboots or new movies? I can name a good few YouTubers. Just search blackwashing if you want to see literally hundreds of racists crying about Black Hermione, Black 007, even though it's just a code number and James Bond's still in the movie, Black Human Torch, Black Ariel, and so on. In fact, we covered one of them a couple of months ago. Surprisingly, no mention of Scarlett Johansson's recent questionable career choices, the many anime adaptations with surprisingly white protagonists, basically everyone in the last Airbender movie, or Johnny Depp playing a Native American character because he's distantly Cherokee. It's not just Nazis believing in a Jewish or communist conspiracy to control the population. It's not always called cultural Marxism, it's not always explicitly the Jews or even the communists, but so often it's a variation on that. It's the liberals, it's the feminists. There's a conspiracy to replace all the white people in movies with black people, orchestrated by people we're not going to mention by name, for reasons we'll lightly skirt over. The conspiracy theorists may have convinced themselves that actually it's the left in general, or the lizard people, who are utilising media in order to spread a message of inclusivity and diversity. The reptilian conspiracy, incidentally, also has its roots in anti-Semitism, which maybe I'll talk about at length in future. The surface elements may change, but the core idea, the concept, is unchanging. Most people don't even know they believe in the cultural Marxism conspiracy, but deep down, at the core of what they're saying, it's there. All it takes is for someone to take a look at Black Ariel and say, hey, that's weird, I wonder why that happened, and give it a quick Google, and there we are. They're led to poisonous people like One Angry Gamer calling mixed-race people half-breeds, or accusing them of not being true bloods, which might lead to the iconoclast, and they're onto more explicit white supremacy, or maybe they just come across someone like The Quartering or Geeks Plus Gamers, ranting about how liberal feminist Hollywood is trying to erase white people from movies, or just someone like Jar Media, complaining about any political messaging in media, somehow implying that any media can be apolitical, and slowly down and down the pipeline they go, until they find themselves watching Mark Collett insist that there is a Jewish conspiracy to indoctrinate the people through oven chip adverts. It's a similar, probably extremely interconnected, pipeline to the previously established Pewdie pipeline American Johnson coined, and which I brought up in a previous video. It may not get everyone, and not everyone who thinks like this will end up with the extreme Nazi version. The thing about the pipeline is that it isn't inevitable, but it's definitely possible to get sucked in, and by the time you realise what's happened, you're halfway down or more. But as I said, the core idea is the same, and all that changes between Geeks Plus Gamers to One Angry Gamer to Mark Collett is attributing blame to different groups or motivations to different nefarious goals. That's just the decoration, the surrounding fluff, the paraphernalia. What matters and what carries so much weight is the idea, and that's not going to go away anytime soon. How many people do you know who buy into it? I know quite a few.
Is it water with the sheep in the box?
Hello everyone, another sort of shorter one for you today, mostly because I do record these a few weeks in advance, so this is actually between Christmas and New Year as I'm recording this right now, and whilst I do like putting videos out, sometimes I don't have the time to dedicate to making another feature-length video, but don't worry, that is coming. My cryptids video is looking like it's probably going to be another 1.5 hour long feature-length video, but much like the Harry Potter one that took me months and months to make, it'll probably be the same for that one. In the meantime, I'm just sort of making these shorter, snappier videos to cover topics that appeal to me and that I do want to talk about, but that I can't really justify making hours and hours and hours worth of content on. Anyway, if you're watching this, you probably know why we're here, but just in case you've missed out or something, the people on screen at the moment are all the people who give me money each month, which is, honestly, I say this every time, but it's astonishing and amazing and just thank you so much. But I especially want to thank the following people. Corvus. Next we have Brian, Stacey Solano, Susie M, Thomas McCallum, and Tom Newport.